Today's story is one of the very touching and inspiring stories. The story is entitled Brothers and Inheritance. Without further introduction, let us dive into the depths of this story. In a distant village, a boy named Kasim lived with his family. He was the youngest and weakest among his brothers. Unlike them, he did not work in the fields. Instead, he stayed home to help his mother with daily chores. Because of this, his brothers mocked him and saw him as useless. When their father passed away, life became even harder for Kasim. His brothers took all the land and wealth, leaving him with nothing but an old pickaxe. Feeling abandoned and powerless, Kasim realized he had no place among them. So, he decided to leave and find his own destiny. As he walked, he reached the shore of a calm lake, where the sunlight shimmered on the water. An idea struck him. He gathered wood and tied it to an old tub his brothers had given him. Using this, he built a small boat and sailed across the lake, hoping for a new beginning. On the other side, he saw a grand palace. Curious, he entered and met the king, asking for a job. The king was surprised and asked what he owned. Kasim smiled and said, "Only this old pickaxe." The king laughed and said, "You may not have much, but luck can work wonders." Then he gave Kasim a job as a palace servant. Over time, Kasim became well-liked for his honesty and bravery. While living in the palace, he met Princess Layla, the king's daughter, known for her beauty and intelligence. Many noblemen and warriors sought her hand in marriage, but she was not impressed by gifts or promises. She wanted someone who could prove their worth. Layla set a difficult challenge. Anyone who wished to marry her must retrieve 4 rare treasures from a powerful giant across the lake. These treasures were a golden sword from a great battle, 3 golden hens that laid rare eggs, a glowing lantern that shone in the darkest night, and a magical harp that played enchanting melodies. The challenge spread across the kingdom, attracting princes and mighty warriors. However, when they faced the giant, they all failed. His enormous size and fiery eyes struck fear into anyone who dared approach him. Then came Kasim, holding only his old pickaxe, ready to face his fate. One by one, the warriors had fallen, unable to defeat the giant. The king, heartbroken, feared for his daughter's future. According to the kingdom's traditions, Princess Layla could not remain unmarried. The king had to pass his throne to her future husband. But as time passed, hope faded, and the kingdom's future seemed uncertain. Hearing about the giant and his treasures, Kasim thought of Princess Layla. Her beauty and wisdom filled his mind, and a daring idea took shape. Why couldn't he be the one to retrieve the treasures and win her heart? On a bright morning, Kasim gathered his courage and headed to the palace. The place was full of activity, guards in their uniforms and nobles whispering about the warriors' failures. But Kasim didn't hesitate. He walked steadily until he stood before the throne, where the king sat with a worried expression. With a confident voice, Kasim said, "Your Majesty, I want to take on the challenge and retrieve the treasures from the giant. I want to prove that I can succeed where others have failed." Hearing this, the king's face darkened with anger. His voice boomed like thunder in a stormy sky. "Do you think that, as a mere servant, you can succeed where the greatest warriors have failed?" He spoke not only in disbelief but also out of concern, fearing for Kasim's life. But Kasim didn't back down. He met the king's gaze and said firmly, "Please, Your Majesty, give me a chance. I may be young, but I believe in courage and determination. I promise to do my best." The king studied the boy's face. He was torn between doubt and curiosity. After a long silence, He finally allowed Qasim to go, though his voice was heavy with sorrow. "But this journey may cost you your life. I will grieve if you do not return. Do you understand the risks?" In that moment, Qasim felt both fear and inspiration. He knew this was more than just an adventure. It was a true test of his bravery. But his determination was stronger than his doubts. Gripping his old pickaxe tightly, he set off. Reaching the lake, he checked his small boat, built from an old tub, then climbed in and rowed quietly across the water. When he reached the other shore, he carefully made his way to the giant's home and hid there overnight. At dawn, the giant woke up and marched to his barn, the ground shaking under his massive footsteps. His loud grunts echoed through the mountains. Qasim's heart pounded, but he remained calm. He picked up a handful of small stones and climbed onto the barn's roof. Through a small gap, he saw the giant holding his enormous golden sword. The sword hummed whenever the giant became angry. Qasim saw an opportunity. He threw a small stone at the sword. It let out a loud ringing sound. The giant stopped and looked around. "Why is my sword ringing? I am not angry," he muttered, confused. But after a moment, he continued his work. Qasim threw another stone, then a third. This time, the giant grew furious. With a roar, he yanked off his belt and threw the sword outside the barn. Then, he went back to his work. Seizing his chance, Qasim jumped down, grabbed the golden sword, and ran toward his boat. His heart raced as the waves pushed him forward. When he reached the other shore, he hid the sword behind a large tree. A wave of joy filled his chest. He had succeeded in his first task. The next morning, he felt even more determined. He filled his bag with corn, small, tasty grains that birds loved, then set off again across the lake. Upon arrival, he hid behind a large rock and watched the area. Near the shore, 3 golden hens wandered around, their shiny feathers sparkling in the sunlight. They moved gracefully, pecking at bits of food on the ground. Qasim knew he had to be careful. Slowly, he scattered some corn, hoping to lure the hens closer. As they followed the trail of corn, Qasim felt a surge of excitement. Step by step, the hens moved toward the water, unaware of the danger ahead. Patiently, Qasim led them closer to his boat. When they were near enough, he quickly stepped forward and gently nudged them toward the boat. At first, they hesitated, but with steady hands, he guided one into the boat using a strong rope. His heart pounded, but he was determined. With one final push, he set the boat afloat, paddling swiftly away from the shore. He glanced back, making sure the giant hadn't noticed. As the boat glided through the water, a deep sense of victory filled him. The first hen sat calmly beside him, and soon the others followed. At that moment, he knew his intelligence and courage had led him to success once again. For days, Qasim remained trapped in the dark barn, his heart heavy with fear. The giant continued feeding him nuts and sweet milk, waiting for the day he would be fat enough to eat. But Qasim was not ready to give up. He knew that if he didn't find a way to escape soon, his fate would be sealed. One night, as the wind howled outside, Qasim sat in the corner of the barn, staring at the flickering lantern that hung from a wooden beam. An idea sparked in his mind. He had one chance, one final attempt to outsmart the giant. The next morning, when the giant returned to check on him, Qasim pretended to look weak and helpless. He coughed and held his stomach, moaning as if he was sick. The giant frowned. "What's wrong with you?" he growled. "I feel unwell," Qasim whispered, his voice shaky. "Perhaps the food does not agree with me." The giant scratched his head, unsure of what to do. He didn't want to eat sick meat. "Fine, he said. "I will wait a little longer." That night, while the giant snored loudly in his chamber, Qasim quietly moved to the barn door. Using his small hands, he felt along the wooden planks for a weak spot. He remembered the hole the giant had made to check on him. Carefully, he pushed against it, widening the gap little by little. After what felt like hours, he squeezed his body through the opening and ran as fast as he could. His heart pounded as he made his way toward the giant's treasure room, where the golden harp was kept. The room was guarded by a heavy iron door, but Qasim had noticed something before. When the giant entered, he always muttered a strange word under his breath. Qasim had listened carefully and memorized the sound. Taking a deep breath, he whispered, "Raktal." With a loud creak, the door unlocked. Inside, the golden harp rested on a velvet cloth, glowing softly in the moonlight. Qasim grabbed it and turned to leave, but suddenly, the harp spoke. "Where are you taking me?" it asked in a soft, melodic voice. Qasim nearly dropped it in shock, but quickly regained his composure. "I am taking you to a safer place," he whispered, "but you must stay silent." The harp agreed, and Qasim hurried out. But just as he reached the barn, a deafening roar shook the ground. The giant had woken up. "Thief!" he bellowed, his massive footsteps making the earth tremble. Qasim sprinted toward his boat, gripping the harp tightly. The giant stormed after him, his eyes blazing with fury. Qasim pushed the boat into the water and jumped in, paddling with all his strength. The giant reached the shore just as Qasim got halfway across the lake. Roaring with rage, the giant reached for a boulder and hurled it at the boat. The rock crashed into the water, creating massive waves that rocked the boat violently. Qasim held on tight, fear gripping his heart. But then, the golden harp began to play a soothing melody on its own. The music was enchanting, spreading across the lake like a gentle breeze. The giant, who had been preparing to throw another boulder, suddenly stopped. His angry expression softened, and his eyes grew heavy. With a loud sigh, the giant collapsed onto the shore, fast asleep. Qasim could hardly believe it. He paddled as fast as he could, reaching the other side safely. As soon as he stepped onto land, he hid the harp with the other treasures and fell to his knees, breathless but victorious. At sunrise, Qasim returned to the palace with the 4 treasures: the golden sword, the 3 golden hens, the glowing lantern, and the enchanted harp. The entire kingdom gathered, astonished by his success. The king, who had doubted him before, now looked at him with great respect. "You have done what no warrior could," the king declared. "You have proven your courage and wisdom." Princess Layla smiled, her eyes shining with admiration. "You are not just brave, Qasim. You are clever and kind." And so, Qasim was no longer just a servant. He became a hero, and soon after, the prince of the kingdom. The villagers, who once mocked him, now told tales of his bravery for generations to come. And as for the giant, he remained asleep by the lake, never to cause trouble again. Days passed, and one morning the giant returned to the barn. He ordered the boy to stick his finger through a hole in the wall, but instead of his finger, the boy pushed out a wrapped-up stick. When the giant cut it, he believed the boy was finally fat enough to eat. Satisfied, he decided it was time to cook him. The next day, the giant told his wife to bake the boy in the oven while he went to invite his relatives for the feast. She prepared the oven and told the boy to sit on the paddle so she could push him inside. But every time he tried, he kept slipping off. Frustrated, she scolded him. The boy told her he didn't know how to sit properly. Wanting to show him, she sat on the paddle herself. At that moment, the boy quickly shoved her into the oven and slammed the door shut. He then took her fur cloak, stuffed it with straw, and placed it on the bed to trick the giant. With the giant's massive keys, he unlocked the 12 locks and grabbed the golden harp before running toward the shore, where his boat was hidden. When the giant returned, he discovered his wife was gone, and so was the harp. Enraged, he searched everywhere, only to find his wife roasted inside the oven. Overcome with fury, he ran toward the shore and spotted the boy sailing away, playing the golden harp. The music filled the air, soft and enchanting, as the boy sailed on, unaware that the giant was chasing him. The giant waded into the water, determined to catch him. But with each step, he grew weaker and more exhausted. Desperate, he tried to drink the lake dry to lower the water level, but the more he drank, the more pain he felt. Suddenly, his body swelled and burst into a massive wave, disappearing forever. The boy, now free, sailed across the lake, his heart filled with joy. He had finally defeated the evil that had haunted him for so long. When he reached the shore, he stepped out of the boat, dressed in fine clothes, his golden hair shining under the sun. He carried the giant's sword and the golden harp, with golden birds flying behind him, creating a breathtaking scene. At the royal palace, the people gathered in celebration. He placed the treasures before the princess, who smiled brightly at him. It was a moment of triumph, not just for winning the treasures, but for proving himself as a hero. He married the princess, and the kingdom rejoiced with music and laughter. Years later, the king passed away, but he left behind a wise and just ruler. The young prince led the kingdom with kindness, bringing peace and prosperity to all. His story became a legend, told for generations to come, a tale of courage, cleverness, and a boy who became a king. And that, my dear friends, is the end of our story. See you tomorrow for another exciting tale. Don't forget to follow so you won't miss it.